Hi, guys. So, recently I had a conversation with someone who confidently told me a few things. First, that the United States doesn't actually allow more harmful food chemicals than Europe, that Europe just renames them to make them sound safer. Second, that Americans are only overweight because their portions are bigger. And third, that the real reason Europeans are thinner is simply because Europe is more walkable, while the United States is too car dependent. Now, at first glance, that might sound reasonable. But the problem is, this entire argument is a mix of half truths, misunderstandings, and in one case, just straight up false information. So let's break it down properly. Let's start with the most blatantly wrong claim. The idea that Europe doesn't ban more food additives and instead just renames them to hide what they are. That's not true. In the European Union, food additives are labeled using something called E numbers. That might sound suspicious if you never heard of it, but it's actually the opposite of hiding anything. It's a standardized system. For example, a dye like Allura Red AC, commonly called Red 40 in the United States, is labeled as E129 in Europe. Same substance, different naming system. That's it. Not hidden, not disguised, just categorized. And here's the important part. The EU doesn't just label additives differently. It often regulates them more strictly than the US. For instance, some additives that are still allowed in the United States, approved by the FDA, are restricted or banned in Europe. Take potassium bromate. Banned in the EU due to cancer concerns, but still permitted in the United States under certain limits. Or titanium dioxide, banned in the EU as of 2022, but still used in the US. So, no, Europe is not secretly renaming chemicals to trick people. That's just a misunderstanding of how labeling works. A quick note on what's allowed in food. While we're on the topic of food standards, here's something most people don't even realize. Different regions also have different tolerances for what can end up in your food. Not just chemicals, but physical contaminants. The FDA, for example, has guidelines that allow for very small amounts of things like insect fragments in certain foods. That sounds disgusting, but to be fair, it's because completely eliminating them is practically impossible in large-scale agriculture. Europe has similar realities, but often applies stricter expectations and precautionary rules in certain categories, especially fresh foods. So again, the difference isn't one side is lying, it's the standards, thresholds, and philosophies that are not identical. Now let's talk about one of the most famous differences: chicken. In the United States, it's common practice to wash chicken meat in antimicrobial solutions, including chlorine-based rinses. In the European Union, that practice is banned. Now, before anyone panics, this doesn't mean Americans are eating bleach-soaked meat. The process is considered safe by United States regulators and is used to reduce bacteria like Salmonella. But Europe takes a different approach. Instead of cleaning the meat at the end, the EU focuses more on hygiene throughout the entire production chain. So the final chlorine wash isn't considered necessary and is therefore not allowed. And yes, I don't know about you, but if you tell me my chicken had a chlorine bath, even if it's technically safe, I'm not exactly lining up to try what I'd call a pool chicken. Now, let's move to the next claim, that Americans are overweight purely because portion sizes are bigger. There's some truth there. Portions in the United States are, on average, larger than in the Netherlands or other European countries. But saying that this is the reason people gain weight is way too simplistic. Because here's the obvious question. If the portion is bigger, why eat all of it? No one is physically forcing you to finish your plate. You can stop, you can save it, you can throw it away if you really have to. So yes, larger portions make it easier to overeat, but they don't remove personal choice from the equation. Next argument, Europe is more walkable than the US, and the US is too car-centric. This one is actually largely true. Cities in places like the Netherlands are designed for walking and cycling. Meanwhile, a lot of infrastructure in the United States revolves around cars. That absolutely affects how much people move on a daily basis, but again, this is not the full story. Because even if your environment doesn't naturally encourage movement, you can still exercise. You can go to the gym. You can go for a run. You can choose to be active. So while environment influences behavior, it doesn't completely control it. So the reality is that obesity isn't caused by one thing. It's not just chemicals. It's not just portion sizes. It's not just walkability. It's a combination of factors. Diet, lifestyle, environment, habits, and yes, individual choices. The problem with the argument I was given is that it tries to reduce a complex issue down to a couple of convenient explanations, and in doing so, it ignores half the picture. So no, Europe is not secretly renaming chemicals to hide them. Yes, there are real differences in food standards, from additives to processing methods. Yes, portion sizes in the US are larger, and yes, walkable cities help. But none of these, on their own, explain everything. If you actually want to understand why obesity rates differ between regions, you have to look at the full system, not just cherry pick a few talking points. Because once you do, it becomes clear. There isn't a single cause, and there isn't a single excuse either. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.